Thank you for being back with us on a day in which we are still processing former president, now convicted felon, former President Trump convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records in connection with a bigger crime to subvert the election in 2016. To discuss legal aspects of this, we bring in Neama Rahmani, former federal prosecutor and president and co-founder of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Neama, thank you so much for being back with us. We've discussed this case and a lot of the Trump legal issues a lot, so it's great to have you today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. A historic day in America.
It really is, and I suppose off the top, just as a former federal prosecutor, let's just discuss what your reaction was to the case, what we saw from a prosecution and defense standpoint.
Well, as a lawyer, you and I were taught to believe in our criminal justice system and our jury system, and I believe that they got it right today. And I know that there's a significant percentage of the American people that are watching that believe that Trump was treated unfairly and that our justice system was used to persecute him, or this was a witch hunt. But ultimately, 12 men and women on that panel took their job seriously, and they got it right. So I tip my hat to the jurors. I tip my hat to Judge Juan Merchan, who oversaw a very difficult, politicized case. And of course, Alvin Bragg for bringing a challenging case. Let's not forget, he is the first person prosecutor. This case was rejected by two other entities, the Department of Justice and his predecessor, Cyrus Vance, when he was Manhattan DA. He brought a difficult case, and he brought it home, and he won. So credit to him as well.
And if we could speak about Alvin Bragg for a moment and this novel legal theory. We call it a novel legal theory because it's under a New York State statute that essentially no one has ever prosecuted before. When they've searched the records, there's only been 2 references to this statute, and it was Judge Juan Merchan making those references in connection with Trump. And the idea was falsifying business records in connection with a larger crime of basically an illegal campaign contribution by David Pecker and the National Enquirer to Trump. Just talk about that legal theory, because that's where a lot of the political criticism comes, that this is a made-up charge and a sham election.
Well, understandably so. I mean, we're talking about conduct that occurred more than 8 years ago, some of this. And, you know, in the intricacies of New York law, business records that are false, they're just a misdemeanor, unless they're in furtherance of or to cover up another crime. And one of those being election fraud or a campaign finance violation or tax crimes. It's a really convoluted legal theory, even for lawyers like us who've been doing this a long time. Tough to understand. I think the defense made a huge mistake by keeping 2 lawyers on the panel. I know they went through all their peremptory strikes, but lawyers are trained to tune out the noise, the political back and forth, scandalous details about the affair, and decide the case solely on the facts and evidence in this case. And they were able to sort through the jury instruction. Obviously, we don't know what happened in that deliberation room, but I believe that those 2 lawyers were able to guide the jurors and get the right result.
It's interesting you bring up the lawyers and the jury, because when they were on the jury, a lot of people said, actually, this is bad for the prosecution because you don't want someone in there bungling the jury instruction and kind of litigating the case. But either way, it's a wild card, I think, to your point. And if you could, in our final moment, just talk about the defense's decision not to impeach Cohen to the extent that perhaps they could have. You and I were speaking off air, and you were saying that's really where the critique of the defense lies. Just unpack that for us.
I think so, too. I think the defense made this case entirely about Michael Cohen. The only substantive witness they called, Bob Costello, was an impeachment witness. They didn't really provide any alternate theory of the case. And it turns out that the star witness wasn't Michael Cohen at all. It was actually Enquirer head David Pecker. He was the one that was able to tie Trump directly to this catch-and-kill scheme and to say that really this was about influencing the 2016 election, not protecting from his family, from his embarrassment at all. And, of course, that's how we got the criminal intent. That's how we got the misdemeanors to the felonies. And when the jurors asked for that readback yesterday of Pecker's testimony, it was clear that some, but not all the jurors were ready to convict. And those final holdout jurors were able to come around this afternoon.
Well, it's very interesting. There'll be lots of Monday morning quarterbacking, but there is, of course, a future for this case. There will be sentencing on July 11th. There'll be lots of conversations around appeals in the New York appellate court system, possibly the Supreme Court as a longer shot. Neama, appreciate you. And why don't you stick around a little later in the show? We'll have you back, and we can discuss some of those other issues. Sound good?
Of course. Thanks, Amrit.
All right. Thank you so much. That's Neama Rahmani, former federal prosecutor, giving a sense of what we saw legally. There's also a conversation to have about the politics of this, which we'll have briefly. Before we do that, let's take a look at what's happening around Southern California.